Good morning, all. I'd like to call the order the meeting of August 27th of the Calaveras County Planning Commission. Let the record show that all members of the commission other than the chair are present. First order of business, I'd like to have everyone join us in the flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Are there any agenda changes?
No.
Okay. At this point, we have a public comment period. Anyone in the audience that would like to address the Planning Commission on any land use issue that is not on today's agenda, this is your opportunity. If it's on today's agenda, you'll have a chance when the time comes. But first of all, is there anything not on today's agenda you'd like to address the Planning Commission for? There being none?
There is.
Oh.
Good morning, commissioners. My name is Lou Mayhew. In yesterday's Valley Springs News, there was a letter to the editor by Al Duncan, and I thought it was worth mentioning. He wrote, "We all know Amador and Calaveras counties are some of the most beautiful places in the country. That's why we live here. Now the rest of the country knows as well. The Washington Post compiled data that was collected and ranked all 3,111 counties in the United States by beauty. The rankings were Calaveras County came in 14th of the 3,000, while Amador County came in 29th. The rankings were based on something called the Natural Amenities Index, that is described as a measure of the physical characteristics of a county area that enhances the location as a place to live. 14th out of all of the counties in the United States. I think that is worth reflecting on. The finding is consistent with what so many county residents understand just by living here. And this is the overwhelming sentiment they expressed throughout the many public meetings on the general plan and was reflected in several of the Mintier documents. I think you have a special responsibility. It came through as a desire to protect the open space, scenic vistas, and general natural beauty of this place and still foster economic development. The grand hope seems to be that these two goals may both be accomplished and reasonable land use regulations adopted. Surely that is possible. Unfortunately, at least some of the general plan edits that this commission has turned in to the supervisors seem to be systematically removing acknowledgement of that sense of place and the beauty of the place that people have, and also under the guise of private property rights, would seem to be heading in a direction which would lessen those protections in the favor of ultimately beginning to deteriorate what I think is the primary asset of this county, its natural beauty and all that means. I don't think you have to be naive and think that you can preserve it as it is, but certainly the general plan ought to emerge as a document that strikes a balance and to the extent possible acknowledges what a special place this is while also fostering economic development. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything that is not on today's agenda they'd like to mention? Okay, moving right along. Under the consent agenda, the only thing we have is the minutes of the July 30th meeting. Have you all reviewed the minutes, and do you have any comments?
It's all good for me.
I had a few typos that I gave on that. Was all. Keith Tallia's name was not spelled correctly,
Oh, no.
and there was an apostrophe where it shouldn't be, and I think that was the extent of it.
Okay. Any other additions or corrections to the minutes?
I had a question on page 3. There are 3 bullet points, beginning with the one that mentions a comment from Colleen Platt, and then Commissioner McLaughlin and Director Maurer. Commissioner McLaughlin asked Maurer if the public comments were addressed in the background report, and if not, when. I'm not sure what public comments McLaughlin was talking about there, Mr. Maurer. Can you enlighten me on that? Was she talking about survey kind of results, or was she talking about public comments such as we have in our meetings?
I think she was referring to the public comments that we received during the public review period from December through March.
From years ago?
No, from the release of the draft general plan. We had the public comment period, and there were a number of comments related to the background document, the background report. And they weren't necessarily addressed in the background report so much as would they be addressed when we review the background report.
So the background report, which we're going to get from you
Next week, yeah.
that's going to have a component in it of what have we heard from the public? Is that the
No,
idea?
no. There were comments such as, you know, some of this information is outdated, or you didn't include this information, or this does not provide, you know, enough background, those kinds of comments. Just as we received comments on the noise element and the vision statement, those kinds of comments. So we will be addressing those comments. Maybe the statement attributed to Commissioner McLaughlin needs to be revised.
Well, it's
After
probably...
the public comments will be addressed when we review the background report.
Okay, I'm
I'm
not trying to nitpick it here. It's probably just a factor of my not remembering the conversation in the context, and then not understanding this note in the context of a conversation that
I mean, the background report is not going to contain some type of summary of public comments. That's not the intent of that document. So I'm just trying to think, I don't remember the conversation either from almost a month ago, this specific exchange. But it seems that given the context of what we were discussing at the time, and that, you know, having just finished reviewing all of the public comments on the background report, that I believe that was what
Okay, so
and then looking at
the comments that Ms. Platt and Ms. McLaughlin were referencing were written comments submitted
yes,
to your department during the review period, the 90-day period.
right.
Okay.
So I think that to make sure that the record is clear, I would recommend that we modify the one statement from Commissioner McLaughlin stating that if the Commissioner McLaughlin asked Maurer if the public comments will be addressed when we review the background report, and if not, when. And then my response is, we haven't done it yet, but we will be when we get to the background report. That's accurate.
Thank you.
Any other comments on the minutes of the last meeting? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, 4-0, one absent. Okay, moving along to public hearings. The planning commission will review and recommendations to the board of supervisors on the general plan update. Peter Maurer, the planning director, will lead us on that discussion, and then we'll move on to the noise element.
Well, the noise element is what's
Yeah.
before us today. We reviewed this a few weeks ago, and we got some direction from the commission to expand the discussion, provide some greater background information, better understanding of how noise analysis works. And I hope that the additional text that we've provided in there helps with that effect, to provide sort of a layman's explanation of noise measurement, effect of noise, those kinds of things. There weren't a lot of changes suggested with the policies. A couple of minor amendments that we had previously suggested. We did, however, make some fairly significant changes to the implementation programs. In fact, I think just about every one of them, all but one, were modified to better reflect what we felt we heard from the commission a few weeks ago. I did receive an email yesterday from the Ag Coalition suggesting 2 additional modifications. I passed out a copy of that to you. There's also copies on the podium there for the public if they'd like to see that. The first suggestion is on policy noise 1.7 to expand the resource-based uses that have the potential to be noisy. Right now, we've just identified industrial and mineral resource production lands as being sort of potentially noisy, that development going in next to those would need to accommodate it and take into account the fact that there could be noise next door. They're suggesting that we strike the word mineral from that and add word land. So resource production lands would include also timber and agricultural lands that have the potential for noise generation, and if you're moving in a development next to that, that needs to be taken into account, and that the new development next door would need to design their project to minimize the effect of the existing noise that would be there from ag operations or timber operations, as well as mining. I think that's a reasonable recommendation, and would recommend that change. The other was adding an additional policy that references the right to farm. I think that's a good idea, but I think we could accommodate that in an existing policy, noise 1.11, where we talk about maintaining a noise ordinance, and we list a number of things, and I think we could just add and referencing the right to farm ordinance at the end of that list of things, so that we are incorporating that into whatever changes we might make in the future in our noise ordinance. So rather than a separate policy, I would add that to policy 11.
Okay, without looking at the place where the farm ordinance is referenced in the draft, it's in there. Is this saying put it in another place to make it?
The Ag Coalition was suggesting to have a separate policy that specifically references the right to farm ordinance. And since we have another policy that already talks about modifying and updating and maintaining a noise ordinance, it seems like that would be an appropriate place to put that, so it's all together. All the components of a noise ordinance are all in one policy. And I think that would address the concern that they have, and it from a practical matter, so it helps keep everything together.
So the Ag Coalition's concern with 1.7, correct me if I'm wrong, is to make sure that the noise ordinance says that when you've got a project that's proximate to an ag operation and there's a noise issue, it's the project's issue to deal with that, mitigate that in some way. It's not ag's responsibility.
That's correct.
Is that basically the message here?
Yes, that's the message, yes.
Okay.
Well, and the mineral uses are included in resource production.
Mineral resources would be part of the resource production, mineral, ag, and timber. I don't really have anything else as far as presentation. If we just want to walk through any issues, concerns you have, or if Amy has anything she would like to add at this point, we can just sort of answer any questions you have. Hopefully we had a chance to review the revised draft, and if you have any concerns or questions, we'll try to answer that, and then we can open up to the public.
I have some.
Okay.
In the introduction, the second paragraph, last sentence,
Hang on a second. Let me catch up to you. Go ahead.
where it says noise standards established in the general plan are intended to apply to new projects or substantive expansions of existing uses and noise, and to reduce noise conflicts with adjoining land uses. Later on, the point is made that these standards are intended to apply only if there's a discretionary entitlement involved. In other words, you got to have a use permit. It seems to me that thought ought to be up here instead of on page 1.4 where it is. So you could say noise standards established in the general plan, and I would strike "are intended to" and just say apply only to discretionary entitlements for new projects, and then go on. And then you don't have to repeat the same thing on page NOI 4, where it shows up in the third paragraph from the bottom as the last sentence. I mean, there it's just kind of stuck off by itself.
NOI 4. Right.
That,
So
I
for
think
consistency, you're saying,
you can delete what's on NOI 4 and put the thought in the introduction where it's right up front and people know it going in.
so that makes the introduction paragraph that you're looking at more specific, using the more specific language of the paragraph from NOI page 4.
Correct.
So it's not just any expansion or any substantive expansion, it's a substantive expansion that requires a yada yada.
I think that makes some sense, since typically we would review the general plan policies at the discretionary project level. Anything that's in the noise ordinance would be applied, you know, on all uses. But as far as, you know, these kinds of policies, they are primarily directed towards actions that the county takes in establishing ordinances, as well as new development where we have discretionary review power. So I think that change, that there's some logic to that. I'm trying to find exactly where, I don't remember where we put the statement about, on page 4. You're referring
Last
to.
sentence, third paragraph.
Okay.
Not third full, but third underlined.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, on that same sentence, it says it applies to substantive expansions of existing uses. I'm not sure that's the right word, substantive as opposed to what, procedural? Or should it be substantial expansions?
If I can chime in here, wouldn't the replacement of the language make that moot? Wouldn't you be deleting that phrase and inserting discretionary entitlements? Projects requiring discretionary entitlements?
The way I had
How would that sentence
envisioned it, it
read?
would, I was not proposing to change the other language. It would say it would apply only to discretionary entitlements for new projects or whatever the right modifier is for expansions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think substantial probably, I don't know that it makes a difference. I'm not an English major, so substantive versus substantial. I'm not sure if it, if that's.
I thought
don't
that
see
for
it.
consistency, you were suggesting to insert, to replace the relevant language from the introduction with the more specific language from this page here, so that there would be no doubt as to what kind of projects we're talking about.
That's in essence, that's right, but it also has the same language.
Oh,
I think it's helpful to have, you know, that, just as far as explanation, that discretion, not always just new projects. Sometimes there's a, you know, discretionary action associated with expansion of existing project. So I think whether we change it to substantial or there's some other word in there that makes sense, that would be good. And I think we can then just, that last sentence just basically is struck on page 4,
Well,
that third paragraph.
on page 4, it reads, whether it's a new project or a substantive expansion of existing use, it's still requires, it's still within the discretionary entitlement category of projects, correct?
Yes,
Wait.
yes, yes,
Grammatically, that's how it reads.
yes.
So that focuses on, in the introduction, that makes sure that the reader understands this is not any substantive expansion, it's a substantive expansion requiring a discretionary entitlement.
That's correct. Yes. So that sentence essentially now, the way that it's proposed as by Commissioner Wooster, would be identical. More, I mean, almost identical. There's a couple word changes, but it's for flow. But
Yeah, the way I had it envisioned, it would read, noise standards established in the general plan apply only to discretionary entitlements for new projects or substantial expansions of existing uses to reduce noise conflicts with adjoining land uses. Okay, now I have another point where I am confused.
okay.
And maybe there's an internal inconsistency here in the document. I'll find my way here. Okay, on page NOI 1, under background and setting and so forth, the third paragraph says the decibel scale also is logarithmic, not linear. Therefore, an increase of 3 dBA is generally perceived as a doubling of loudness. Okay. On page NOI 3, down the page, 2/3, there's a paragraph that starts with respect to increases in A-weighted noise levels in general. A 3 dBA change is a just perceivable difference. and a 10 dBA change is subjectively heard as approximately doubling in loudness and can cause an adverse response. And it seems to me those are not consistent. One says a 3 dBA change is barely perceptible. Then it says a 3 dBA change is perceived as a doubling in loudness, and then it says a 10 dBA change is perceived as a doubling in loudness. And
That last bullet is in error. It is a tenfold increase.
That was a good
Which
catch.
one is in error?
On page 3, the last bullet there. We had some confusion over that. We had to go back and forth with the noise consultant several times to get clarification on that point. But we did, in the end, understand that 3 dB is doubling, 10 dB is a tenfold increase.
It's tenfold.
Yes.
That was a good catch.
Okay. We have these two tables. Table 1 for transportation-related noise, and then Table 2 for stationary noise sources. And they're not the same. And when I look at the other standards that were supplied to us from the state of California and the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Aviation Administration, they only have one set of tables or one set of standards. And I guess I'm wondering, why do we have two tables, one for transportation-related noise and one for stationary noise, when the other standards we've been given don't seem to do that? I mean, do we need two tables? Why do we have them?
So the tables that we received from, that we provided in the report that we looked at from various state and federal sources, address the receptor for the most part. Here's what, is considered an acceptable level for people to receive that noise. The type of noise that's generated from traffic differs from a stationary source in the way that it is distributed. So you've got this long linear roadway that has noise coming off of it from a number of different points. It's not one point that if, it's a line, and it varies by time and the amount of traffic is on during parts of the day. Every general plan that I've looked at has always addressed stationary noise and transportation noise differently. Why? I really don't know the answer to that, other than it's just the common practice. And my rough explanation there is probably the best of my knowledge of why it's treated differently, is it's heard differently, it's perceived differently. You get it from a variety of locations. So, my house not too far from Highway 4, I hear the truck traffic beginning up the hill, coming down, and then dissipating as it goes by. Where you've got a point source, it's always from that same location. It's not moving. That noise source is not moving. And so it's always sort of more constant in its effect. Now, it'll change because, if it's an industrial use, it, increases during the day and then decreases during night because they, slow down operations, or whatever the source may, whatever the change may be in over time, it differs, but it's always coming from that same location, so it's perceived a little differently. And I guess that's the best explanation I can make. I don't know, Amy, do you have any other?
Well, other than it's transportation noise, they measure it over a 24-hour period, always. Whereas a stationary noise source, it operates a little differently. They're like 9 to 5 or 8 to 5. So they will actually take measurements from a stationary noise source for an hour, 2 hours, that type of thing. So when you're looking at noise for a transportation use, you want to look at it differently than you do for a stationary use. The transportation, you definitely want to go over a 24-hour period and average it to know what you're actually dealing with. Whereas with a stationary noise source, you sort of want to look at it while it's open for business versus when it's closed for business. Does that make some sense? So they actually measure it differently. They actually use an LEQ when you're looking at a stationary noise source. That's just a measurement over a certain period of time. Whereas when you're looking at transportation sources, you want to look at the big picture on that and see what their average is over a longer period of time, because it changes so much throughout the day. It's like up and down and up and down and up and down. Stationary noise sources tend to be a little less so. They tend to be a little bit more with a little spike here. Does that make that harder to understand or easier?
I think I understand what you said, but I'm trying to figure out whether that's really the right way to do it. Because to me, noise is noise. And if you're averaging transportation noise over a 24-hour period, that skews the level downward to the extent there's hardly any traffic at 2 in the morning. And so you would be noisier during the day than what your measurement would indicate.
Except that when they do the 24-hour noise measurement, they weight it during certain periods of the day.
And also the noise is more acceptable during the daytime than it would be at night.
So they take a 24-hour reading and then they weight it in the nighttime hours. You get like a 10-volt penalty or 10 decibel penalty. Evening hours, you get like a 3 decibel penalty. During the day, it's what it is. They do that with that. They don't do that with necessarily with stationary noise sources.
Do they do that to take away the bimodal business of morning and evening traffic?
They do it to average everything over an entire day. Because if you wanted a reading for traffic noise, you'd have to have like a dozen of them if you really wanted to know what kind of noise was coming off a roadway. You'd have 11 to 12, it was one thing, and 10 to 1 in the morning, it was another thing. You'd have a different reading for every 24-hour increment. Whereas, and what they want to do is have an overall average so that when they design it, they know what they're aiming for overall. We'll blame it on the transportation engineers, perhaps trying to make it easier for themselves to have one number to shoot for, as opposed to having to address 12.
But Mr. Wooster's point that makes sense to me is if transportation is weighted in the way that you describe, so as to achieve an average, and stationary operations also vary in as much as they are relatively constant during the operating hours, but they are zero the rest of the time, then they should also be weighted, right?
Except they take a slightly different approach. They actually just break it down daytime, nighttime.
So they just dismiss nighttime altogether?
No, they use a lower one for nighttime. They use like a 45 in table 2.
Oh, I see, there's a
Yeah.
nighttime.
And they use a daytime. So they use a daytime average and they use a nighttime average, and that's all they do.
But that's not a whole lot of difference between day and night there. I mean, night seems like it would ought to be almost zero. What are they allowing for there?
Well, again, that's a tenfold change, 45 to 55.
Oh, okay.
And 45 is really, that's what the interior of your home is, sort of desirable.
Okay.
Zero, you don't really get to zero, even in some of the finest, sound-controlled rooms. There's, if you go into a zero, it's like sensory deprivation at that point. You'll go mad if you're at zero.
And table 2 is also an hourly average. So let's say you're in a factory, ping, 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 and it spikes, spikes, spikes. Well, that's not going to show up in an hourly average as being 70 decibels, even if you hit 70 decibels while you're going ping, ping, ping with a certain industrial use. You're just giving your hourly average during the day, or like an hour. Your average hourly average.
Okay, one more. On our table noise 1, which is the transportation related one, and this is just kind of by way of example, we're at 60 allowable for residential, for outdoor. And when I look at everybody else, the other examples that are supplied, the Federal Highway Works Administration is 67, the FAA is 65, the EPA is 65, HUD's 65, the state of California is 65. And I know we have a footnote to that that says, well, if you can show that you tried to mitigate it and you can't, you can go to 65. But why are we more restrictive than every other authority that I've been supplied with here?
I think it's really a matter of we tend to live in a fairly quiet rural environment, and part of the desire is to keep it that way. You know, the 65, that's a national average. That includes, you know, living in dense urban areas. You're going to have a lot more, you know, just noise just from all the various activities going on. Part of the desire for this county would be to maintain that quality that people are attracted to for businesses and for living here. So we did look around at some of the other counties. It's very comparable to what, you know, the counties around us have. I think it's pretty standard for rural counties.
The state and the federal standards are intended to apply to federally and state-funded type programs, usually very large. San Francisco Bay Area, we're widening it from 20 to 30 lanes, that type of thing. So they're going to be higher, simply because they can't make it lower and still build their project. Whereas in most of the counties we looked at, and we looked at Alpine, Amador, Colusa, El Dorado, Kern, Mariposa, Placer, Plumas, San Luis Obispo, Shasta, Sonoma, Stanislaus, Trinity, Tulare, and Tuolumne County, they were all very similar to ours.
Okay, but I have a related question to Mr. Wooster's. On page 5 of attachment 2, the top paragraph references this difference between, well, they say 55 and 65 without reading the entire language. You see that comparison? They're saying 65 this is now the EPA. Appropriate for residential uses, 65, which can realistically be achieved. LDN, I forget what average that is.
Day-night.
Pardon?
Day-night.
Day-night. Activity interference is kept to a minimum and annoyance levels are still low. So here we are in our document saying, you know, referencing that difference and those numbers, and we're not saying, but we prefer 60 because we're a rural county. And then in the next section there, under the heading Department of Housing, the HUD area, the first bullet point, first and second bullet point references the 65, and then the second bullet point says exceeding 65 dBA LDN, but not exceeding 75, a normally unacceptable zone where mitigation measures would be required. So that's quite a difference from where we are.
And these agencies are allowed to exempt themselves from the standard. The rest of us must apply under the California Building Code and under the California Noise Insulation Standards. We actually have to aim for a somewhat more stringent requirement, if you will, than the feds do for their federally funded projects.
Okay, so if we've got a HUD project,
Yes.
this is the only portion we need to be concerned with.
If it's HUD funded, yes, we would have to use HUD standards.
Okay, fine, I understand that. So this is a HUD-only issue, but the upper paragraph that I was referencing before relates to the question that Mr. Worcester brought up, was that we're saying 65 is the realistically achievable level. We don't have an asterisk there. We don't have a footnote. You know, we're aiming for 60 because we're a rural county, as in Table 1.
And we can explain that in the table, why our standards are more stringent than those of federal agencies.
Okay. As a kind of a compromise position, would it be possible to say, we are aiming for 60 because we think that's more consistent with the rural environment? And I understand that. But where that's impractical to achieve, or words to that effect, we will aim for 65.
We do in fact do that with the footnote.
Footnote E on Table 1.
Table 1, if, for example, on 60D, it says where it's not possible to do 60, then you can go to 65.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I like that.
DM.
Well, I'm sorry. Let me read footnote E again. Where it's not possible, possible is probably the wrong word. It's not a word that I would use, because possible, if you throw enough money at it, anything's possible.
They qualify it. I'll let you finish reading that.
Show me where.
Where it's not possible using practical application of best available noise reduction measures, and you may still want to change that.
The practical application phrase covers that, my concern, you're saying?
Well, that's
I believe so, yes.
That's the idea?
That's the intent, yes.
Would the word feasible be better?
It's more nebulous.
Well, as Commissioner Tuno points out, anything is possible if you throw enough money at it. And well, I was a little troubled by that word myself. Maybe feasible is not right, but possible is pretty strong.
In other words, using the first sentence, where it is not practical using best available noise reduction measures, then you have your alternative standard. Are you following my edit?
I am. I'm just playing with the idea of alternatives. There are a bunch of options you could go there. I'll let you guys play with that for a while, but there are a couple alternatives you can look at.
In the interest of sort of moving on, could we bracket that and say, now you know what our concern is, other people can jump in, but looking at that language?
Yeah. Yeah, we let the public weigh in on that discussion point as well.
That's all the questions I had.
I've got a few, and some of them are pretty broad brushstrokes, so I feel like I should apologize because maybe some of this was previously discussed, and maybe it's going to sound like I'm backing up a little too far, but I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll accept whatever criticism arises. Looking at the 96 plan, and the noise element is minuscule compared to our current draft. Can somebody kind of explain what happened? It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, like a half a dozen pages or so. Very, very simple. Did noise elements across the state? Did they balloon in this period of time? What happened? What happened?
I actually paid attention to that
You did?
and looked at what the.
Does that mean you had the same concern I did?
Well, I wanted to see what the average size was, and they were all about the same size as ours after we added in all the explanatory language with background on noise. In fact, ours reads almost identically to, wow, the vast majority of other rural county general plans,
Our current draft?
the current draft.
I think the answer to your question is yes, the
More restrictive.
desire and requirements for noise analysis and noise requirements of general plan have grown in the last 20 years.
Environmental awareness is growing every place. Yeah.
Exactly.
Is there ever an instance where it backs up? No.
I will let you know.
Yeah, I'll hold my breath.
Okay.
I have more. I do this in a kind of a linear way, but a lot of these things sort of bounce back and forth. Page 2 of 2 in the discussion area. Third paragraph, third sentence, the comparison table shows, that's the comparison table that shows state versus us, right? That's later on in the attachment.
Yes.
The comparison table shows that the county is consistent with the state standards and slightly more restrictive for indoor noise levels for office buildings, theaters, churches, libraries, and exterior noise levels for residential uses. It adds exterior noise standards for transient lodging, et cetera, et cetera. The question that I have later on when I'm looking at those two tables, and that's on, that's attachment 2, is can you tell us or remind me why we have, why not just adopt the state standards? Why did we choose not to do that? And is that the rural county component that you mentioned before?
Yes,
Is that the answer?
that's the answer.
Ours are very, very close to the state standards.
Yeah.
We're a little, we allow a little more noise.
Well, let me point out some differences that concern me, and just a few. Looking at the side-by-side table, everybody can be on the same page with me. Residential, first item, exterior, 65, versus, that's the state, versus us, 60. Now, we've been told that a 5 dB difference is quite a bit. I forget how the language that describes that, okay? Hotel, motel, transient lodging. There's a blank in the state, and we're at 65, so I don't know what we're comparing. How did we get to 60? How did we get to a number when the state didn't have one?
We looked at other counties and turned to our noise engineer to ask him what's the general practice, and that's the number we were given.
Okay.
Is it flexible? Yeah.
In general, I have a question about why are there blanks? I mean, the noise people have been at this for a long time. Why would there ever be a blank? A no figure?
Well, for exterior noise at a commercial building, I guess the real question is who cares? If the concern is in an office building, in a bank, can you conduct business? And so you're concerned about the interior noise. If you're out in the parking lot, it happens to be on a busy urban street, that's sort of expected, so there is no standard established by the state.
They tend to emphasize residential schools. And that's sort of what they care about outside. And parks, I see. But they don't care about commercial industrial.
So a reason why we might want to have an exterior noise standard for a hotel or motel is that, we rely on tourism, and people come here not just to have a place to rest their head while they're attending a conference in San Francisco. They're coming up here for an experience where they're going to be in and out of their lodging facility. Maybe there's a patio or a deck, and if it's very noisy there, that's not going to be as conducive as to get up into the woods, into the hills to enjoy this beautiful environment we have. So that's why I feel, at least, that it's appropriate that we do have an exterior standard for those types of uses. We don't have one for an office building. Once you get inside the office, that's where it's a concern. Outside the office, it's not something that I believe that we are concerned about. Obviously, we don't want to have it so it's so, we have general standards for all of commercial uses, but it's not something that's lower than the threshold.
Is the number in brackets below the, if you can't, what we were talking about before?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what the footnote.
Are there any other rural counties that just take the state standard and say that's good enough for us?
Some do. There are some. Most of them have a little bit of a modification here or there.
Okay, just let me, hang on, I'm scanning. If somebody wants to jump in, go ahead.
So on that table, the reduction for amphitheaters, concert halls, auditoriums is down by 10 decibels. That's quite extreme, don't you think? Because an amphitheater, whether you're in the city or you're in the rural area, don't you think that sound level is going to be comparable?
And again, it's discretionary. There is no adopted standard. There are recommended guidelines. And so yes, that number could be different if you so choose.
Because that was a 10 decibel drop.
Mm-hmm. It is. That is probably the biggest difference we have.
Going on with, on the next page where we've got the A through, whatever it is, H, items D and E. First of all, D is where you would want to look at that same language from that we talked about before. E is similar. But my question is, why do we have both of those? Doesn't D negate E?
No, because one is going from 60 to 65.
Say again, please.
One is going from 60 to 65. The other is going from 65 to 70.
We don't have anything that references 70. No.
Could we have combined them? Probably.
You could say a 5 decibel increase
Can you speak
rather
up?
than.
Can you move that microphone?
Sorry. Yes. So one is to go 60 to 65.
Yeah.
The other is to go 65 to 70.
Yeah, but what,
Yes, we could have combined them and basically talked about what Peter was just getting ready to say there.
when does D kick in and when does E kick in?
D kicks in, it has to do with the use. Going back to table,
So E would apply to
lodging.
lodging facilities, so that the footnote applies to that specific use and that line on table noise 1. So D would apply to residential uses and hospitals and churches. E applies to the transient lodging.
That's in the brackets?
Yes.
It indicates in the brackets, that's where you go, okay. Item H, the county can impose noise level standards that are more restrictive than those specified in the following tables upon determination of existing low ambient noise levels. So, note to self, this seems to say that if the existing level is low, keep it low versus there's room for an increase. Is that correct?
Relatively correct. It's a relative.
Do you see my point?
I do.
If you've got low ambient noise, one way to look at it is
You got a lot of.
you've got some room to increase it and still make it okay.
Unfortunately, the way the humans respond to noise is based upon their experience with the existing noise.
So it's
level.
differential that you're talking about.
Yes. It's a relative.
Custom differential.
Yes.
So as we review a project, and we find that through our noise analysis that the ambient noise is very low, that could be an issue that's addressed in the CEQA document, and we could say because of its uniqueness in this location, we are going to apply a mitigation measure that is lower than our general plan standards because of these unique factors, and it's something that would be considered during that discretionary review. So these are the standard requirements, but it's not absolute, depending on the uniqueness of the site, uniqueness of the project.
Can you give an example, or is that too, off the top of your head, is that too?
Residential, you got a quiet residential area and you're going to put a 5-lane freeway through it.
Well, okay. How about something more Calaveras County realistic? 4-lane freeway.
You're going to have rock concerts 7 days a week at the fairgrounds, and there's a subdivision next to it. That subdivision is used to, let's say, 50 decibels all the time, and this is going to raise it to 85 for a significant period of time. You're going to have some very unhappy residents, and we would look at that and say, wow, even though we allow 85, we're going to have to just limit that maybe to,
Got it.
you know, up 1 or 2 times a month or blah, blah, blah.
Thank you. You look like you want to jump in.
Well, to a certain extent, I think that consideration was taken into account when we had lower allowable levels than the state standards. That was done on the basis that we're rural and kind of quiet to begin with. Now we're reserving the right to make it even more restrictive than the lowering that we already accomplished in the tables.
And
I'm a little concerned about how open-ended this is. I mean, if somebody comes in to do something, there doesn't seem to be any limit here on how restrictive the county can be under this.
You can add a limit if you want.
Footnote
You can
H.
say if there's a change of greater than between the existing and the proposed.
I think anytime you come up with a standard, there's going to be some exceptions to it. There's going to be, some circumstance where the ambient noise is, it's so pristine that some discretionary use going in there that would raise it maybe to the 65 dB, which is within our standard, or the 60 dB, whatever, standard is such that, that's going to have a significant impact, even though it meets our standard. And so it allows the county to use its discretion and take into consideration the unique circumstance of that location in analyzing noise and its effect on the environment and on the people that are there already, that where that change is going to significantly affect that area, that we have the ability to revisit that. Now, that's not something that we just, staff can say arbitrarily, you're going to have to meet 50. That's something that would be reviewed through the public hearing process, through the CEQA analysis process. Ultimately, you or the board would have that determination of saying, we think it's appropriate in this location because of these unique circumstances, through all the analysis that we've done, to have a lower threshold than what our general plan usually calls out for. It's not something I think would be used arbitrarily, but I think it's important that we have that ability to apply that in some case.
Yeah, I understand wanting the ability to make a judgment like that, but I also understand from the other side, and this is where I believe Mr. Booster is coming from. I share his concern that from the other side of the equation, they want the ability to look at a set of regulations and say, yeah, we can meet that. Oh no, because some neighbors have a concern, and what triggers the special circumstances, and therefore this kind of analysis that the person has to go through a CEQA analysis to have an activity that's otherwise allowable.
So one of the policies is that if there's a change, I don't remember exactly what it was, of a certain number of decibels, that requires a noise analysis as a part of the project review. It's something that's standard for CEQA documents. We have to look at noise. In some cases, we can say, well, the noise increase is only 2 decibels, therefore it's not significant, and that's the end of it. Once we get into a level of significance, then we have to mitigate that, or we make findings of overriding consideration. So we will be looking at that with pretty much any project, unless we can just clearly say that that project will not have an increase in noise. And so as we look at that, they provide the analysis, what's the background noise level, what's the proposed increase would be, how does that affect surrounding uses. We would look at all of that in the context of our environmental review and make that determination at that point in time. And I think it is very subjective, obviously, but noise is subjective. It's probably one of the most subjective impact analysis areas that we have with project review. Some people it won't affect them at all. Others will be very affected by it. They'll find it to be a very significant impact to them, and others say, well, yeah, you can hear it, but it's not a big problem to me. So, and again, it's going to depend on where you're at. If you're in one of the communities living close to a busy road, you're used to a certain amount of noise. It just sort of comes with the territory. But if you're somewhere else out in a more remote area of the county that has very low ambient noise, then a slight increase, even if it's not up to the threshold level, could have a significant change. I don't know if I answered the question or not.
Well, it sure puts a question mark next to everything that we...
Unfortunately, I don't think we can have a standard response for everything, for every situation. This covers probably 99% of the situations that we have, but there's going to be the unique circumstance where there is a project somewhere that's going to generate noise that it's going to have an impact greater than you would normally expect because of the existing low ambient sound levels.
Okay, and then normally expect becomes a pretty important factor, doesn't it? Because if you live next to an amphitheater, then you should normally expect that there's concerts going on there.
But the question is, did you move in and there wasn't an amphitheater, or did you move in and there was an amphitheater?
Well, if you moved into a fairgrounds, there's lots of
I
pretty
think
varied use.
maybe the example of being next to the fairgrounds wasn't a great one.
Right.
If someone's proposing a new concert venue up out of West Point,
There you go.
that would be a different situation than someone proposing a concert venue at the fairgrounds, where you have events going on regularly. There's noise, there's loudspeakers, there's that kind of stuff. We would still, if their concert venue exceeded the standard, they would still need to meet that standard, and we'd have to put in sound barriers, or they locate it in a way that didn't shoot the sound out, the noise out towards the residential area. But if you're in a very quiet rural part of the county and you're proposing a similar type of use, that's going to have a much greater impact. The exact same use have a much greater impact on that very quiet area of the county than it would be in town at the fairgrounds, someplace that's doesn't have that kind of background noise.
And there are so many variables, and there are so many responses to the variables. Just because you exceed it by more, let's say 10 decibels, oh my gosh, you're raising it by 10 decibels 7 days a week. That doesn't mean you can't do it, so much as perhaps there are mechanisms that can be implemented to make it so it's really only a 5 decibel increase that is heard by the adjacent residences. The timing of it. special events. We do special events, special concerts. So obviously we allow noise to exceed the standards now and then, and that's even written into the general plan.
What kind of expense is there to an applicant when you say, well, we're going to have to look at the noise on this and do an analysis? Who picks up the tab for that? What's involved in that? You're talking about a CEQA noise analysis, am I right about that?
Yes.
Okay.
Depending on the extent of the project, it could be hundreds to thousands of dollars. For example, we have a project, it's an expansion of a cell tower in a residential neighborhood out in the Lake Tulloch area. They had installed new generators, which are constantly running day and night to keep the equipment cool. We required the cell tower company to give us a noise analysis, and they found that they exceeded the noise at the property line for the neighbor next door. They redesigned the project to move the generators down the hill and put in a concrete barrier to block the noise, and it reduced it to below our standard. They're good to go. The additional cost to that for the cell company, Verizon, a few $1,000s probably.
On the analysis?
The analysis is, it might be, I don't know what the analysis cost. It might have been, maybe $1,000, maybe $2,000, maybe $5,000 worth of expense in building the wall and relocating the generators or the air conditioning units.
Okay. On page NOI 3, the third bullet point reads, a 5 dB change is required before a noticeable change in human response is expected. Is that an adverse response, or is that just you turn your head because a motorcycle's going by? Or, what?
It varies depending upon, are you going from 60 to 65? Are you going from 65 to 70? Sometimes you'll just get annoyed. Sometimes you'll lose sleep. Sometimes you'll have a nervous breakdown.
Okay. A response is not necessarily an adverse response. You plug your ears. It's just a response of some kind. It just disturbs the situation.
It's a noticeable response. I mean, if it's, some type of music you really like, it could be positive. But, for the most part, those kind of noises are negative. A loud motorcycle, a
No, that's
bang.
positive. What are you talking about?
Okay, well, again, it depends on, depends on your preference.
Okay. Thank you. I'm still working here. Page NOI 8, policy 1.13. The acoustic analysis was what we were just talking about
Yes.
a moment ago? Okay. Moving along. Oh, page 4 of the attachment 2. The Caltrans numbers. Now here's another example of an entity throwing totally different numbers at us, where a 12 dB increase between existing and design year with conditions is indicated as a substantial increase.
Again,
Where did that come into play?
that's usually like a 20-year projection. So you've got a roadway, and this is what it's going to increase the sound by year 2010. By year 2040, it's going to increase that by a whole bunch more. So they give themselves a larger number because they're looking way down in the future with a transportation facility which doesn't stay stagnant with its noise level. It goes up and up and up over time, usually as there's more traffic using that road.
So how does this play into how do we factor in a Caltrans number to our projects?
When we have a state-funded Caltrans project, it will normally be a project that's under the Regional Transportation Plan that Calaveras Council of Governments may perhaps be undertaking.
So this is the standard that Caltrans has set for itself, which is relatively high, meaning that they don't want to have to worry as much about the effect of their noise on the surrounding environment. They want to punch a new highway through land that's a 12 is an okay standard for us. Now, the county may say that's not acceptable to us, however. And so the Caltrans...
Wins.
It depends. I mean, they're going to lobby for... So Caltrans has to do an environmental analysis of their project. And they say, okay, this road will have an increase of 10 decibels over the 20-year horizon of the analysis of expansion. And we say, well, no, this is going through a quiet residential area, and our threshold is 5. And we want you to to design it to reduce that noise from the future traffic that will be generated by this noise. Put in noise barriers, put in berms or something like that to decrease that level. The environmental analysis that Caltrans will have to go through to approve that project will have to take that in consideration. Ultimately, it's a negotiation process. I think that if the county or the public took a firm stand on this noise is unacceptable to us and here's our standards, that the county would prevail if it wanted to take that issue with Caltrans.
Caltrans also looks at existing noise level in comparison to what they will create. If it's nice and quiet and they're going to add 12 decibels, not a good thing. If it's noisy already and they're going to add 12 decibels,
So again, this is a statewide standard that applies to urban areas as well as rural areas.
Okay.
but they do have to look at that, the difference between what's already there versus what they're going to do. It's that footnote we were talking about before.
Yeah, okay.
It matters what's there first.
It also matters who wants to dig in their heels the hardest, right?
Yeah.
I think I'm about at the end here. I'm on page 6 of attachment 2, which is this other table. State of California. Now this is another State of California table. It's page 6 of attachment 2. What role does this table play?
This comes out of the guidelines for general plan, and was developed as sort of a just identification of what is acceptable for different kinds of uses, so for different receptors. And I think it correlates with the other table, the comparison table that we had.
Well, kind of.
Kind of.
I'm looking at the in the color coding, conditionally acceptable. Residential goes up to 70. Transient lodging, we were talking about that before, 70. I'm assuming these are exterior conditions. Schools, libraries, churches, hospitals, nursing homes, 70. Auditoriums and the like, 75. So yet another set of standards higher than ours by quite a bit.
Yeah. So I think that conditionally acceptable is sort of the area of, a gray area, the area of debate. Under what conditions would that noise level be acceptable? Again, this is a statewide standard, urban areas, you're going to have people's yards that are going to be more noisy. People are, more conditioned to that, and they are willing to accept it.
Okay, let me pose a for instance.
Okay.
Yeah, overall, we're a rural county, but there are parts of us that aren't rural. We got towns too. So would your department, looking at a project, for example, say, here's where our more quiet standards aren't really going to work. We're going to rely on state standards. We're going to fall back on state standards. Is that a realistic, is that a scenario that, by the frown on your face, I suggest?
I would say no. If we establish standards that are lower than the states, those are our standards. Now, we do have the provision that if you can't meet that standard,
Yeah.
we can increase a little bit.
Okay.
But
Is this the point to which we will say if we can't meet our lower standards through the practical yada yada, then we can go up, and we're going to go up to the state standard? Is that why this is in here?
No, this is
this is just for informational.
It's just information. This is what all old general plans have in them. Over time, people felt that there was perhaps too much room for interpretation and wanted something a bit more predictable. So now we have a table that actually says, this is it, and we'll put a footnote where we think it's got some flexibility.
Well, okay, but then
So
if it doesn't serve any useful purpose other than saying this is where we were, then I don't, why would...
this was a part of the staff report. This was just a attachment to the staff report that said, here are some examples of standards that are, this is not something that we're adopting. This whole attachment 2 was just informational for you as we go through and establish what the county standards should be. Here are some ranges that have been found to be acceptable in the past, other jurisdictions have used. That's sort of the whole purpose of this attachment 2 document, was to compare what we are recommending versus what other agencies use. Amy talked about a number of other counties and what they've used. That's what that's for. This would not be something that we would be adopting. This was just an attachment to the staff report for your information.
Oh, okay. Then perhaps there ought to be a footnote. This is being offered for this purpose.
Actually, no one's going to see that except you guys.
Actually, it's being offered because at the last meeting, we asked to see all those tables. That's
Right,
why
for your
we asked for
for
them
your
to bring
information.
that
Okay,
back.
it's not going to be in the element.
Correct.
We wanted
Yeah,
that
this was just as
information.
part of the staff report to you.
Okay, what tables are going to be in the element? 1 and 2?
The element, pages 1 through 11, 1 through 12 of the noise element. So that includes tables 1 and 2.
Only stuff that says NOI.
Okay, this lives on in some kind of background information?
Yes, it'll be part of the public records for the general plan process.
Then that's all I have for now.
So I think they hit on a lot of the questions that I have, but after listening to a lot of discussion here today, one of the things that's really bothering me is discretion given to the county to be more restrictive. I'm struggling with that only because it's very ambiguous. It puts us back in a position that we're dealing with now where we've given discretion, and it opens it up to other people interpreting our county rules versus our county setting the standard and saying this is what our decibel is. I think when we start adding all this discretionary stuff that we are causing ourselves a lot of problems. I looked at the City of Angels, and they have specific circumstances in their plan that state whenever there is something specific to an area, the fairgrounds, the gun club. They actually reference those areas and their noise levels and why theirs are different. So it takes that discretionary out of it. It's in stone and taken care of. We keep saying it's flexible. I don't see any flexible. I see we're more restrictive than most. We are a rural county. I respect that. I like my quiet and peace too. My question, I have a couple of specific questions, and David hit on a few of them, but when we're looking at this, Peter, and this is going to affect new business or expanding business, is this something that's going to be required of everybody and anybody trying to open up a new business, or is it only going to be required when a CEQA report is activated?
It's going to be required when there's a discretionary action, which then is subject to CEQA.
Okay.
So if someone's moving into a new business, or it's just simply a building permit to construct a commercial building in a commercial area, then that would not apply, other than what we might have adopted in our noise ordinance for day-to-day normal operations.
Okay. So do we have a set standard list on you're applying for a new business license, and we already pretty much know what those noise levels are? That isn't going to play any role in it, so if they can submit to us certain calcs on, say, a generator, use Verizon for an example, we knew their generators were ridiculously loud for residences in the neighborhood. Do we have something that is, as far as technical reports, that could mitigate that and say you need to come into compliance with this, or are we just automatically saying go out and do your CEQA report and get us that noise study? We don't have any type of waiver of set standards, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Do you mean that if they had been able to give you a manufacturer's thing that said, oh, this generator produces this sound level, would we have still made them do a noise?
Yes. So if they have mitigation.
That's the usual way that people satisfy that issue, is
Okay.
give us the manufacturing specs on the generator you're using or the air conditioning unit you're using. We'll see if it, how far away does it, meet the threshold. You're within that, you're good to go.
Okay.
That's the standard practice. It's only when they exceed that, then we say, okay, now you need to show us how you're going to mitigate that, what kind of noise barriers or design, issues you're going to incorporate into the project to meet our standards. Unless it's something that's clearly just very noisy, then we would need to have, the concert example, a racetrack. You're going to have to do a much more detailed, expensive noise analysis to show how that proposal is going to affect noise around the project site and how you're proposing to mitigate it.
Okay, and then when you talked about, yeah, that just left my head. You were talking about mitigating the Verizon tower, and I'm just going back to that example because it was a good one. So they had to build sound barrier, set it in the concrete. Did they also do the analysis on that? And you're saying it only cost a couple $1,000s, but your previous comment said that those analyses could be $100,000, $200,000?
No, I said hundreds to thousands of dollars. I don't know.
Okay, I thought you said hundreds of thousands, and I'm like, well, okay, thank you.
No. I knew as I said that, that someone's going to misunderstood what I said there.
Well, I did misunderstand, and I was sitting here going, wow, we better find some really good businesses someday to come to town because nobody can afford that. When I'm looking at, you references all the different counties, and thank you for doing that and telling us the counties that you looked up. When I looked at the City of Angels, they're pretty similar to the state of California chart that we were looking at. So you looked at that as well, because I didn't hear you name that off on your list.
I did. I wrote it.
Okay. All right. I'm going to hold for now, but I'm going to, I think that after we have public comment, I would like to revisit the words restrictive. Go ahead.
Before you pick it up, Ted, can I ask one more question? And it's about the property line measurement. The receptor is measured at the property line, right? You've got a noisemaker and a receptor, and the receptor is whatever the property line is, the adjacent property. But we don't allow for the fact that the true receptor, that is some people, can be quite some distance from the property line. So what concerns me is a situation where you've got a noisemaker in this box, a generator for, some operation, let's say. And at the property line, there's an excess. but the real receptor is hundreds of yards away. What's our justification for taking it at the property line, other than just consistency for the sake of consistency? Why not some factor where the true receptor being some greater distance is the measurement that we should be concerned with?
That's the standard practice for acoustical engineers. Now, in the analysis, they can certainly look at the fact that, oh yeah, it measures this at the property line, but it's this far back, and it's unlikely. They'd have to look at each individual circumstance. Maybe that person might want to build up closer to their property line over time. Maybe they won't. But the analysis can actually look at all those details. And maybe there are extenuating circumstances, and they can say, yep, it's 55 at the property line, but you know what? Here's this use. It's never going to move. It's 200 feet away. The noise level by the time you get there meets the standards. Are we okay with that?
Okay. When an entity comes before you and says, "I want to do something," and they know that there's going to be a noise issue, do they get from you, here's the things that, we're going to be looking at, so that it's not all just in your head? There's some kind of a document, some kind of a pro forma. Here's the concerns that you need to be aware of from our end.
Yes. Yes, we will explain that to them when they come in. We
it's-
don't have a handout right now, but, we'll tell them, here's what we need for your analysis to look at. Here are the sensitive uses that are surrounding your proposed project. These are the things you need to address. The noise consultants know what needs to be done as well. There's a handful of consultants around the area. They work with multiple jurisdictions. Everyone's requirements, secret requirements are pretty much the same, and so they know what information is necessary to provide the jurisdiction with the information they can make the decision on. So yes, we'll work with the applicant to explain, here's what we need, here's our concern, and the acoustical engineers that do the analysis know what's necessary as well.
So they would get a complete list of, complete in quotes, a list of factors that could apply to their situation. Mm-hmm. In the analysis that you're going to perform, or that their sound people are going to perform, they would have a fairly complete list of things that are important to you, including mitigating factors such as distance in this hypothetical scenario.
What they're usually going to know is that they're going to need a noise study. And so the first thing they do after learning that is they call up their favorite noise consultant and they talk about those things. And then that person, there's back and forth if there are any questions. It's so technical that generally Mr. X developer, they don't usually get into that level of detail, nor want to know that level of detail. They turn that over to their noise consultant, usually.
I'm sorry?
They usually turn that over to their noise consultant to give them all the gory details.
Well,
and those people know to look in the general plan at those tables.
I think leaving the property line and doing that mitigation factor is kind of dangerous because, like you said, the person that lives next door, if they want to build closer to their property line, there's the property line. We need to mitigate the noise to the inside of their property. I mean, you're basically.
It is an issue. We have large rural parcels, 40 acres, 100 acres, something like that. But I think as if you have a use out there that would impact the surrounding properties, that's when Amy's scenario of, well, let's take a look at the factors. Are there, is it flat? Is it hilly? Where is the existing residence? Now, the problem with that is that if it's vacant and someone who owns that has an intention of building on it, maybe they want to build it closer than, it could be within 30 feet of the property line. That's the setback requirement. So I know of another county that established what they call an outdoor activity area for rural parcels. I think it was within 100 feet of the home, and that was where it was measured from. On smaller, more suburban parcels, it was the property line, but anything over, I think it was 5 or 10 acres, you could measure the impact of adjacent uses to that outdoor activity area, which was 100 feet from the structure. To get into that. That did create problems. Well, what happens if there's no structure? Then where do you measure it from?
Well, no, I mean, obviously it's within 100 feet of the home.
Right.
Okay.
But if there's no home on the property, but it's still zoned residential, we're protecting that future residential use.
Sure.
If someone owns that property and has an expectation that, you know, they're either going to sell it to someone who wants to build on it, or they're going to build on it themselves at some time in the future. So the balance that's trying to be met here is the expectation of the adjacent property owner as well as the desires of the, you know, project proponent.
That's where you get into all that discretionary. If you hold it at the property line, these are acceptable numbers, we're not going to end up in problems later.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I have dealt with the issues
99%
where there are clearly unbuildable areas on a parcel. Let's say it's a, you know, a flat, or there's a valley, a hill, and then it drops off very steeply to the property line. There's a use down here. Well, no one's going to be building on that steep hillside.
Right.
So, it's, you know, we can say from the top of the hill on back down is where the likely building area, and that hillside might buffer the adjacent use to some degree.
Okay.
So those are the kind of site-specific issues that we would get involved in during the review of a project proposal, if noise was an issue.
Okay.
But if they can just meet the standard, you know, it's fairly simple. Here are calculations, here's we meet it, okay, we're good to go.
In a situation where there's an opponent to the project, and the opponent says, no, your code says you measure at the property line. And you say, yeah, but our policy is to look at other factors that make sense, like the property, like the contours that you just pointed out. Makes perfect sense. And they say, yeah, your general plan says this, and doesn't that trump your judgment in this situation? I mean, aren't you up against that kind of an argument that you have to counter such an argument, one where it's in black and white, and one where, you know, we're supposed to be able to use our judgment?
But realistically, that complaint is going to come from the property owner, usually, who is adjacent to the
No,
noise.
not necessarily.
Well,
It could be, no. Well, look what's going on here.
I understand.
Yeah.
So
It could be somebody from across the county.
I think the county does have some flexibility, not, you know, you'd have to be able to demonstrate, you know, factually demonstrate that the approval of the project met the intent of the general plan policies. That, you know, we have the analysis to show it, it's, you know, it's
Where the studies come in.
yeah, and that's where the analysis comes in. The county could say, we recognize that that's our standard, but given these circumstances, and here's the analysis to support that action, we could, doesn't mean we would, but we could approve a project that exceeds that in a variety of different ways.
Can you point to the language in the element, in the draft, that you would fall back on in that weird circumstance?
Well, doesn't it come up in footnote B on table 1?
B as in Baker?
B as in Baker, which these standards, other than interior, apply to outdoor activity areas. And footnote B appears to have some flexibility in it,
Yes.
because it defines an outdoor activity area as a location outside of the immediate structure where formal or informal activities are likely to happen. And it's only where the location of an outdoor activity area is unknown. The exterior noise level standard shall be applied at the property line of the receiving land use. So I thought that's where your flexibility comes in, to take into account what's there, the
Right.
steepness, where something is likely to happen at the receiving area.
My response to Commissioner Tuna was more in general to finding of consistency with the general plan. You don't have to be 100% in compliance with every single policy to make a finding of consistency. There was a recent, or fairly recent court case that, I can't remember if it was appellate or Supreme Court case, that, you know, the county found that there were, I don't know, 24 or so policies that applied, And out of those 24, 20 of them were clearly satisfied. The other 4, a sort of gray area. And the county said, we're close enough. This is a general plan, and this covers the intent. Now, there's a part of that ruling said that there were fundamental, I always forget the 3 words that the court used, but essentially there were some policies that are absolute. They're fundamental, they are very specific, fundamental, specific, and I can't remember the 3rd word. But it's these absolute policies that if you don't meet this policy, this is not in compliance with the general plan. But most of the policies in the general plan provide guidance to the county. They're not so specific. This is one where there's standards, and we're trying to meet these standards. But I think that the variables that are provided in a page of footnotes, provide for a level of flexibility that's intended in a general plan. It's not a code requirement that you must meet this. You must. These are the standards we're trying to achieve, and the intent as we review a project against a general plan is is this consistent with what we're trying to accomplish here in the county?
And I realize this is not zoning, and this is not code. This is general plan. But the scenario that I would like to see us avoid, if look ahead and try to avoid, is the one where, similar to a recent action by yourself, asphalt plant M2 zone, you looked at the language, you looked at the words, you looked at definitions, and you had to do all this looking up to determine, to make the finding that you did, make the opinion that you did. Okay? And that became a big dispute, still ongoing.
Yes.
In the situation that we were just talking about, this hypothetical situation, that's not all that hypothetical. It's not out of the realm of possibility, where you've got a perfectly acceptable noise situation because of the distance from the noise generator to the receptor, the contours of the land. You don't need to look at the property line. You can look at other factors. Does this cover you in that situation, or is this another one of those, parse the words situation, and your judgment is called into question, which it can be anyway, but I would like to see the county under such a circumstance have its butt, pardon the expression, covered, and not be into a food fight over words. Do you need to include some language that accounts for that situation if and when?
I don't believe that you do.
Okay.
I think that the understanding of application of general plan policy provides some degree of flexibility, but within reason. And
those aren't going to be famous last words?
oh, they probably will be. And I know 5 years from now, there will be someone who say, well, what's this policy mean? If we ever get it adopted, the next month, someone will say, what's this policy really mean? And there will be interpretation that needs to be done. It's the same time with, any time the county adopts a policy document or an ordinance, it seems to be crystal clear when we adopted it. The next time you read it, you go, what are we trying to say there? I'm not sure. And that's when we come back and we fix that language, if it's unclear. Well, and not wait 20 years and rewrite the whole darn thing.
Respectfully, that's because these things are written by people that don't have English degrees. They're not. I mean, they have a different background, and it means something to them, but most people speak in, plain language. You want to say something, just say it.
And there's always, you think you're covering every base, and then you realize there's something else out there that we didn't think about at the time.
We have the video of you saying this is going, okay, that's all I care about.
Okay.
Okay. This prompts another question. I had referenced footnote B on table 1 that talks about the outdoor activity area, and there's some flexibility there. As and you only use the property line if you can't find out the location of the outdoor activity area. When I go to Table 2, which is the stationary noise sources, it simply says the daytime or nighttime value should not be exceeded as determined at the property line of the noise-sensitive land use, and there's no similar language as appears in Table 1 regarding outdoor activity areas, and I'm wondering why these two are not similar or at least consistent.
That's a real Kelly Wooster find. That's,
I'm not aware of a reason you couldn't use the same footnote in Table 2.
I agree. I agree.
So will we use footnote B in both tables?
If that's what you'd like to add, we can, that would be something that we would add as part of the final motion.
Okay, if the commissioners have no more comments for the time being, I'd like to hear from the public as to what they think about what they've heard here this morning. Anybody?
Okay. Since you asked me. First of all, I feel like I'm lost because I don't have access to all that. It's probably my fault. I'm sure it's available to the public, and it would be nice to think about it in case there's more public interest in here. Like the Board of Supervisors, I have a book that's available to you folks that some of the people who are interested, what you're referencing to, they can come up here and take the book to the side, read it, and they might have some intelligent comments to it. That's one thing. As far as what took place here, you're giving raw meat to attorneys, where all this discussion was taking place. I know attorneys got to make a living, but all these different conditions here, conditions there, and so on, get into it. A $500 attorney can rip it apart, and you know it, okay? Unless, if you're going to make some rules, regulation, laws, codes, whatever you want to call it, make it clear and specific and direct. Because you're not always going to think that you're going to be dealing with reasonable people. I think I'm reasonable, but I think there's a couple of people behind me don't think I'm a reasonable person. And I don't really that crazy about attorneys. They make a pretty decent living. They don't need additional incentive. I noticed one thing never mentioned. What noise level are you gonna, you mentioned about hotel, motels, convention halls, so on. What's gonna be the noise level that you will tolerate in high density buildings? I think it's in pretty much in need and mentioned that you want and you have to have. You build a 3-4 story building, downtown Valley Spring. There's going to be a couple of houses right next to it. 2 acres, 1 acre, 5 acres, whatever. How are you going to classify it? What's the high density noise it's going to be? Average it out with 24 hours. I'll tell you something, and I'm going to make an enemy out of it. A Harley driving down in the morning going to work at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning disturbs me more than the garbage truck goes down twice a day. Or somebody goes, it's legal, you can't tell me you can't go, but a Harley accelerating makes a hell of a lot more noise than a nice little Yamaha or Ducati with low noise. So, you're making exemptions for a whole bunch of things. Well, they don't have to quiet because it's a state. You don't make that because it's federal. That's okay for them to break our rules because they ain't got the money to really fight them unless you replace the schmucks who's elected to that position. That's still going to cost money. Cover your rear, folks. Not so many if and buts and maybe, somehow, could be reasonable, unreasonable. You're going to be fighting set it down, black and white, what is the maximum and minimum, and that's it. Set some rules down. Don't leave it up in the air, well, we'll determine it later. It makes no sense. That's why we pay you the big money. You're the brilliant guy. Come up with a solution, folks. Set it so it's still going to stand in a stone 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Maybe you'll be around to answer for it. Maybe you're not. But some of us still going to be stuck here dealing with it. Set it in stone. And this is it. This is the rule. This is the noise level. This is the decibel that you're going to put up with. This is you're not going to put up with. Set it in stone. This is it. Then let the Board of Supervisors decide if they want to live with it or not. But so many if and maybe, could be, should be. You think that you're going to be dealing with a reasonable person? I never heard one plaintiff and defendant talk to each other. You guys are reasonable. So please consider it. I did not have all the facts that you have. But I accidentally just came across something. Do you ever realize what the noise level requirements, the difference between a church and a library? Look it up sometime. For a church to sing a hymn, they have to go outside the church to read it, to sing, because they're in the same classification as a library. That's idiot hypocrisy. That's a state mandate, not the county mandate. They are, there are real, not very bright rules at state level. You want to cover your butt? This is the state rules. We adopt it. They're not going to bitch about it. They can't. We can't bitch about it because those are state standards. Then we can always see if we can modify it downward or so on. You mentioned a couple of different counties. I would love to see the name of those counties who set what standards up. I don't give a crap what San Francisco set up. I don't want to be like San Francisco. I don't want to be like Sacramento. And I don't want to be like Stockton. But I would like to know, when you reference another counties, give me name, rank, and serial number. Then I can draw an opinion. Now maybe you can draw a better opinion. The source of guidance that you sought. Thank you.
You might want to comment on this, but I think most of what he's asking would be in the noise ordinance, not in the general plan.
Well, I think that as far as having very clear standards, theoretically that makes sense. But as we've discussed for the past 2 hours, there's all kinds of exceptions. Yeah. There's all kinds of nuances to where development's occurring, what's around it. It's not so simple. I think we've established as clear standards as we can, but we want to provide a certain level of flexibility, understanding that noise is very unique in the way it's measured and the effect it has on people. As Mr. Reyes said, the sound of a Harley early in the morning, it's very disturbing to him. Other people find it music to their ears. So, but it is, it's a noise level, and some noises are more irritating than others. Some types of noises are more irritating than others. It's a very complex engineering type of area, and I think we have to. We've tried to be as clear as we possibly can, setting standards, but providing enough guidance to the county where there's unique circumstances that we have to modify those standards, or not modify the standards so much as but provide the the guidance of how to work through the process so that things can get built, but at the same time protect the quality of life in the county.
Can you call them guidance from now on instead of the law per se? This is the guidance. That's it.
And just one clarification so that no one else in the public has the same perception. All these noise standards are for receivers. So it's not, is the church generating this noise? It's how much noise would be received by the church. So all of these standards are receptors. They're not generators.
Okay. Most of the public has some comment.
My name's Al McElroy from Angels Camp. I spent my career in the nuclear power industry, and we took research results and tried to convert them into guidance, particularly for the electric utilities who paid our way. And on this subject of standard versus guidance, we always documented our research results as guidelines and not standards. That might be helpful in allowing for the variability in this subject. And on page 1, second line, precepts of sound and noise are highly subjective.
I'm sorry, what page are you on again, please?
This is in the noise
the
element,
introduction
first page.
Okay, thank you.
And it's the second line,
It's in the introduction.
precepts of sound and noise are highly subjective, and I would just suggest that they can be subjective. I so totally believe with the next statement, one person's music may be another's noise. Thank you.
Who wants to be next?
Lou Mayhew. This has been a very interesting discussion, and I guess I appreciate many of the commissioners' questions and an attempt to clarify and find out the real intent and meaning of different passages. I also would fully support the Ag Coalition's recommended changes. I think that's important. They should be given as much leeway as possible, and so I fully support that. But in general, I think that this is complex enough that you have to, in a sense, trust the process. So you can't nail this down so specifically that covers every condition, that there is a process that can be worked. The process doesn't have to be overly burdensome, and so there needs to be an element of trust in that. And I think that seems to be built in with the footnotes. The other option would seem to be default by increasing the allowable standards. And I think that puts existing property owners at a disadvantage, because there's a higher standard that really becomes a kind of absolute. And they have the burden then of trying to argue beyond that should not occur. And it just seems to me existing property owners ought to be given, there ought to be a sense of defaulting for reasonable protections for them. And if you have a process that allows for differences in slope and other variables that can mitigate, to enter into the dialogue with the planning department, it seems to me that covers that. So I get a sense that the search for absolutes, the downside of that is that you simply seem to be wanting to default in favor of the new development or the expansion. And I think that would do a disservice to existing property owners. So all in all, I appreciate that many other mountain counties were looked at in terms of what their standards were, and it seems to me you got a basically good document here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou.
Holly Mines. I guess I want to pretty much second what Lou said. And I guess I'm a little bit confused because sometimes when I'm sitting here listening to the discussion about how the general plan should be written, I hear the sense that we want to specifically make it vague so that there is room for interpretation, so that we don't get ourselves into a trap. And then at other times, I hear people saying, oh, this is way too vague, and we need to make it much more specific to protect ourselves or to make sure that the client or the person, the new developer or the property owner understands precisely what's said. And I have to agree with what Peter has said, that this Peter, not that Peter, because, well, Mr. Tuno brought up, or through the discussion, that whole issue was brought up about, well, what if the property's in Rolling Hills and the person lives, in an area that's theoretically bermed from the noise? And, well, yeah, that is a possibility, but there's no way to write every condition that might occur into a noise element, as has already been said. And I just wanted to hearken back to a period when I was on the Planning Commission with Ted. We went through quite a process of rewriting or revising the ag ordinance, and the purpose of the revision was to give agriculture a better chance to get a little bit of the economic pie by expanding their uses of their properties from just raising crops and selling them to being able to create venues on their properties that would allow people to come and visit, with the wine tasting, and then what retail items would they be allowed to sell? What about if they wanted to create a venue for weddings and have music there, and then people would come and say, well, that's fine if they're going to do it 3 times a year, but I don't want them to do it every weekend. And so in the consideration of issues like this, we're going from talking about Verizon, who frankly, I'm not going to worry about how much it's going to cost them to do a noise analysis for their tower, as much as I would worry about somebody who has a winery and wants to be able to, have parties and that kind of thing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we want to allow uses of property for people, and we certainly want them to be able to get an economic benefit out of the activities that they have. But I do feel like I hear more from this current Planning Commission that let's err on the side of giving extra to the developer, to the commercial guy, to the retail operator, and if the little guy who's next door has to suffer, well, that's his problem. And I think we've had continual discussions about, honoring private property, but also looking after the benefit of the general public. And so I just urge you, as we go through this, to remember that there's always this balance, and that we have to consider the people who do really value their peace and quiet, and who want to have a balance of, yes, we want economic development, we want fairness for the people who want to come here and open their business, but we also want fairness for those of us who moved here because we are looking for peace and quiet. So I thank you for those considerations. But I do also worry, as we're going through this, we're only on the noise element. I think this is the second pretty much full meeting on the noise element. It's 12 pages, and we have a bunch of other elements that are a lot longer and a lot more complex, and it's a little overwhelming to think of the number of hours we might be sitting here going page by page through these elements and discussing every possible analysis that could be made of every paragraph. I appreciate very much the fact that you're concerned and that you clearly do your homework, but I think it would be nice to see the process moving along a little bit more fluidly than it's doing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. I think we all need to be reminded occasionally that we have more than one client. There might be somebody here for a permit we might consider a client, but there's the rest of the population that are also our clients. And so they're both internal and external clients in this business. Who else has something? No one else? Okay, we'll bring it back to, is there anything that we need to take a motion on?
Well, any changes that you think you'd like to make? There was a suggestion that we modify the introduction statement, taking that sentence out of on page 4 and adding it to page 1, essentially. There is the request, recommendation by the Ag Coalition to modify policy 1.7 and add a new policy. My recommendation would be we do make the change to 1.7, but we modify 1.11 instead of add a new policy. Other than that, we're going to add the footnote B to table 2.
You're on table 1, right?
The footnote from table 1 has been suggested that be added to table 2.
That was Mr. Wooster's last remark.
Yes, yes. I don't know if there are any other edits or changes that you would like to
There was the
suggest.
language that we discussed with respect to footnote E, which also relates, on table 1, which also relates to, where was it? Was it duplicated somewhere else?
I think D and E, the word
D and E.
possible versus
Right.
practical or feasible.
And that was going to be a little drafting exercise on your part. Can we leave it at that? That was where that's where we left it in our discussion.
Well, if you leave it to drafting, then he has to go back drafting.
Yeah,
and bring
I
it
think
back to your
that
approval. We
if
should-
there's some language change we can just make right here, let's do it. If
Okay,
you
I
need
agree.
a 5-minute break and we can play with some language and bring it back,
Why
I don't
not?
want to have to bring this back next meeting. I want to move forward.
Can you come up with some words in 5 minutes?
So I guess what I'd like to hear is what the direction is on that. There's been some discussion about changing possible to feasible or practical. Is there a,
Yes, as a starting point, what I was doing was I was incorporating the phrase "practical application of best available noise reduction measures," and I think I kind of moved that forward. Let me see if I can do this verbally in real time. Where it is
do you want to
not-
take a short break?
Yeah.
And we can play with the
Yeah,
language and
bounce this off you in a break? Okay, deal.
5, 10, what,
10, please.
10 minutes?
10 minutes, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, we'll adjourn for 10 minutes and we'll come back and hopefully have some final
You
language.
want to be in on this, or?
We've used up all 15 of the 10 minutes that we had off.
Except as provided in footnote B.
Those were
But the hard candies, which I
Elephant
forgot
minutes.
to replace,
Yeah.
I love those.
I'd like to call everybody's attention to the fact that people haven't been signing in. So if you are going to speak or have spoken, if you'd sign in our sign-in sheet, that helps a whole lot.
Then we don't have to correct your spelling in the minutes the next meeting.
So, can I make a suggestion that we go down Peter's list one at a time?
That's what we're going to do,
Great,
and
okay.
take a motion on each one.
Okay, good.
Okay, now we're going to go down the list of things that we needed to take an action on that Peter has over there. If he could go down the list and we can take an action on them, and then we'll have a record for the next meeting and for the minutes.
Okay, so the first change that I heard was on page 1, second paragraph in an introduction, last sentence. Noise standards established in the general plan apply only to discretionary entitlements for new projects or substantial expansions of existing uses to reduce noise conflicts with adjoining land uses.
You're looking for consensus? Yes.
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 Okay? Then on page 4, last sentence of the third paragraph would be struck.
You're striking it, or you're making it consistent with the one you just read?
Well,
Don't
I
need
guess
it?
it doesn't really matter. We've said it once. Do we need to say it twice?
No.
Agreed.
Consensus?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. On page 3, there was a correction on the 4th bullet near the bottom of the page. Doubling should read tenfold.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
On page 7, under the goals and policies, noise policy 1.7, the proposal by the Ag Coalition to modify that policy so it reads, new development of noise-sensitive land uses adjacent to existing stationary noise sources or land designated on the general plan land use maps as industrial or resource production lands shall be designed to avoid exposure to noise levels in excess of those in table noise 2.
Yes.
Agreed.
And my recommendation, taken from the Ag Coalition's suggestion, is that we modify policy 111 on page 8, striking the "and" between standards and established, and add at the end of that sentence, and referencing the right to farm ordinance.
Yep.
Agreed.
Agreed.
In table noise 1, footnotes D and E, I think the suggestion was made that we change the word possible to feasible, and also slight modification of the phrase, instead of using a practical application, it would be either using or employing practical applications, so making that plural. I don't care using or employing if there's a preference to one word or another.
That's it for me.
I agree.
So do you want the word using or employing? Which one? Do you want to just leave it using?
I think using is fine. Simplify the language.
Agreed.
Okay, so it's agree feasible and making that plural. There was also something that was pointed out during the break by Commissioner Wooster, that footnote 8, which applies to the whole table, the middle sentence.
I'm sorry, footnote what?
H.
Okay.
The sentence that reads, a daytime or nighttime value should not be exceeded as determined at the property line of noise-sensitive land use. One that really doesn't apply to this table since we don't have daytime or nighttime values. But also that the intent of that sentence seems to conflict with footnote B that provided the flexibility that we were discussing earlier.
I'm sorry.
So-
Would you please repeat this string of thoughts here?
That middle sentence
Yeah.
conflicts with the intent of footnote B. It basically has an absolute, you can't exceed it, and we've just talked about where you might modify.
Yeah.
So, and also it doesn't really apply to this table. I would recommend.
Because of the nighttime.
Daytime, nighttime. So that would just be struck from that footnote.
So we're
That-
striking second sentence
Yes.
completely. Are we adding?
No. On table 2, we're going to add the language from footnote B of table 1. We also have the same sentence in footnote A that we just discussed in footnote H. Now this does apply, but it also has, because we've added footnote B, we have the conflict. I would add at the end of that sentence, except as provided in footnote B,
Okay.
or footnote
Footnote D, Table 1.
Well, we'll add it as footnote C in this table. We've got A and B already. We'll call it footnote C, and we'll call that C there. So we'll add that same footnote to this table.
If you do that, you don't need this sentence that exists in Table 2 at all. It will just be Table B, or footnote B.
So you're suggesting that we strike that sentence in its entirety. Commission's choice.
And you're referencing, did you have to reference footnote D and then specify that it's Table 1?
I think striking that sentence, you know, it's,
Takes it out.
the policy says these are the standards we're going to use. It's somewhat redundant, and it does conflict with the footnote B, so I think striking that sentence makes sense. It's clear these are the standards, you're not supposed to exceed them. Here's the situation where we can modify that or we can vary it. I think it's okay. So I would just concur that striking that is okay.
You'll probably have to do a little wordsmithing to incorporate the substance of footnote B into Table 2, because footnote B ties to the phrase outdoor activity areas,
Okay.
but that's just, I think, a
You're
mechanical.
comfortable with us doing that, and we'll,
Well, then we can't conclude today.
I think we can. I think you can say just modify that footnote. We know what it says to apply to Table A specifically, because you're right, the exact language of it is somewhat different, but the intent is that when we're looking at outdoor activity area, there may be some flexibility there. I think if you're comfortable with our ability to do that to get your intent, and I think that we don't need to bring it back.
It's good. And it's still going to go to the supervisors for approval anyway.
Right.
Okay, I guess my only question is, without the benefit of counsel here, how can we phrase a resolution that covers this with the edits, so that we're not coming back again?
Do we for sure have to modify that footnote?
Let me see. I'm just rereading it now to make sure that. I don't know that we'd have to modify it.
Can you just in the heading to Table 2, have it read maximal allowable noise exposure at outdoor activity areas?
To,
Table 2, yeah, we do need to add the word outdoor.
okay.
And
And then it would make sense.
then just hang a footnote off of that, it would be the same footnote that's in Table 1.
Yes. Maximum allowable noise exposure to exterior noise sources to what, outdoor areas of noise-sensitive land uses? To exterior?
Or
Amy?
just put outdoor in parentheses at the end of it.
Since we use the word exterior, let's continue with that. So if we just put exterior in parentheses at the end of that title, would be okay?
Yes.
Maximum allowable noise exposure from stationary noise sources to noise-sensitive land uses, exterior.
Okay, and then
we'll, a new footnote that is the same as footnote B in Table 1 will be added to Table 2.
how do you, footnote B starts off an outdoor activity area, et cetera. That footnote's meaning keys off the phrase outdoor activity area. And so if you simply add the word exterior to the heading in Table 2, you're not catching up to the phrase an outdoor activity area.
You mean because it doesn't doesn't say that you have to measure it from the property line? Or-
No, the term is outdoor activity area that we're applying the standard to.
Right, and so if you just include that term in your Table 2
So
in
rather
the
than use the
heading.
word exterior, use outdoor activity area.
Right, and then
Okay.
all you have to do is hang exactly the same footnote off of that phrase that appears in Table 1. You don't have to change anything else.
Okay,
It's consistent.
that makes sense, yeah. So table 2, at the end, we just add in parentheses, outdoor activity area.
Right, and then there's a footnote that
And then
comes off.
footnote goes exactly with it, okay. Consensus to that?
That's good.
Yes.
Is there a motion to,
Here we go. So how do we phrase this motion?
Well, I would move that the noise element be modified in the particulars upon which we have reached consensus. On all the matters that Mr. Mauer brought up, from the introduction all the way through Table 2.
Okay,
And is otherwise approved.
Yes.
Is there a second to that?
I'll second that unless Lisa's got it. Lisa?
so are we going to revisit any other issues on here, or is that
No.
final?
well, unless there's any other issues that haven't been brought up yet.
Well, then I want to bring up other issues. I want
Why
to,
don't maybe we withdraw the motion for the moment?
Well,
Okay,
it
I'll
can
with-
be, it's been seconded. It can be still discussed.
Okay.
for discussion. I wanted to bring up, and I'm just going to throw this out there and to the other commissioners and see what their thoughts are. Are you saying that at this point in time, you're accepting this table as written on the noise table 1? You're okay with all those numbers? You're not going to make any changes? You don't?
And the only other point that I did think was troublesome, but I think I'm okay with it now, is that first sentence in footnote H in Table 1, and the same sentence appears in footnote A on Table 2. That's the more restrictive
I thought we crossed that out.
flexibility. I don't think we did.
We did not cross it out. We did get an explanation of it,
Okay.
which is the explanation of why tables 1 and 2 and not, for example, the state standard. For my part, I'm satisfied with the explanation. I'm also satisfied that there is a degree of flexibility in that under circumstances such as we just discussed with respect to D&E,
Right,
the language change on D&E.
that's correct.
Any other?
I guess I'm bothered by a few of these being quite a bit lower than what the standard is. I understand that we're rural. It seems to me that, and it's like I said, going to these more restrictive statements on H, NOI 9, and A, page NOI 10, when we're making the restrictions tighter, then it just tells me that we're not applying the rules to everybody across the board evenly. We're saying we're going to handpick a few of you out and say that we're going to be more restrictive to your projects. I understand there can be certain circumstances where there's more residential, things like that. It just seems to me that if we applied more of the standard, like the state on the noise elements, we wouldn't have to be so far-reaching on being more restrictive, and we would have less concerns being brought forward, because one rule would apply to all except for under certain conditions. But if you guys are all happy with that, then I'm outvoting. I have grave concerns for that. I have concerns that our county is going to use verbiage, we're going to be more restrictive. I think it becomes a selective enforcement issue on projects with you can do this over here, but you can't do this over there, and that bothers me. I do think it looks towards selective enforcement. I think if we looked at these numbers on the tables, amphitheaters being down at 35, I think that's going to be very difficult, even looking at, I mean, it's not like we're infested with amphitheaters, but we're looking to our future for this, so if somebody wanted to put one in, I think that's a pretty restrictive number. I think that barriers could be built to help capacitate that sound and mitigate some of those issues.
Excuse me, Lisa, are you looking at Table 1, the theaters, auditoriums, and music halls
I'm
standard?
looking at Table 1 versus the interior, exterior for the state of California.
So that would be the interior noise inside the theater.
Okay.
That,
Okay, and
we
so
would
we're
be-
not doing, there's no exterior?
No. So it's not regulating the outside noise of what
Okay.
a proposed amphitheater might be. That would be the receptor. If the amphitheater is next to residential, they would need to meet the 60 dB at the property line. And then you would need to design that amphitheater so that it doesn't exceed that. This would be the interior noise within a theater or music hall. I'm not sure why, at this point, it's 5 less than a church or and 10 less than a library. I'm not wedded to that number. If we want to increase that to 40 or 45, I don't think anyone's going to be heartburn over that.
Well, if it's going to be the interior,
Well, wait a second. Which number were you just now mentioning, Peter?
The 35 decibels for theaters, auditoriums, and music halls on Table 1.
Yes, but the 35 doesn't correspond to any number on the state because there isn't one on the state.
Yes, there is. It's actually...
well, we've got
No.
3 categories on.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right,
There's
45.
45 decibels. So, if that's something that you think would be better to be at 40 or 45, I don't think anyone's,
Here's your shot, Lisa.
I think we should be looking at that number.
the state
I
recommends 45.
don't know that we need to go to 45, but maybe go to 40 because 5 decibels is quite a big jump. But I think there needs to be a little more leeway on that number.
Why not just take the state, 45?
Take the state.
I don't have, it's up to you.
What?
I'd have concerns if we went above that, but,
Oh, I would too.
so is there a consensus to change that to 45?
Fine with me.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Good with me. Adding that to your list.
Okay.
Do you want to look at the commercial retail and office building 50 and 55 versus our 45 over here? I should say office building research and develop, blah, 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 professional office. Do our professional offices need to be quieter than a more urban area? Is that the issue? That's kind of the overarching question.
I don't know that-
And just sideline, again, the state standard that's set is using a 24-hour. The general plan one, you're still on table 1.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Scratch that.
I do notice it, and I could not tell you the difference between a CNEL, community noise equivalent level measurement of 50, and an LEQ of 45.
Oh, yeah, I keep forgetting to look at that.
And I
It's a
don't-
different measurement.
It's a different measurement.
You take worst hour,
The state didn't give us an LEQ, did they? No.
No.
They use overall 24-hour average.
So when you're looking at table 2 on stationary noises, we've got 45, 55, and then when you go over to table 1, we're looking at,
Be careful now, because you want to look at that against that.
and there isn't a placement for it.
Right, so if anything, we're less restrictive on ours
Then let's leave it
in table 1 than with the state. Okay?
Okay.
Now, let's go back to Lisa's concern on the amphitheater. Have we blown it by suggesting 35 goes to 45 when in fact it's being measured on a different level?
In comparing it to other counties, it appears that only Plumas County had lowered it.
Okay.
So were all the other counties at the 45 level and we're at 35?
They went 40 or 45. Although Plumas had an odd highest interior at 50. They went 35 to 50. How strange. Let's throw them out.
This is still okay with me,
Yeah, the
but
45.
that's,
I'm comfortable with it.
okay.
Okay. So my only other concern would be the noise level standards do not apply to residential units established in conjunction with industrial or commercial uses. Give me an example one more time, Peter, as to why we would be more restricted than those specified in the following tables, like page NOI 9H. What would be an example of being more restrictive and not following the tables?
So residential outdoor area of 60 decibel is the standard. And if someone is proposing a new use in an area that maybe has an existing ambient noise of 50, would we want to allow it an increase of 10 decibels from this new project? Maybe we would say 55 is more appropriate given the situation of where the proposal is located and the surrounding uses. That would be a situation. And, you know, remember, that's a tenfold increase in noise over what's there now. That would be a significant impact under CEQA. And you'd have, even though it meets our standard, it still would be a significant impact. And I think the point of that is to say, just because we meet the general plan doesn't mean we can't regulate it further.
Okay, so what that line, okay, so here's my concern, is that what that line says to me is that every project coming forward, all someone has to do is say, I don't like it, and they can start having those people, I mean, because...
We deal with that today already.
Okay, and I understand that. So what I'm saying is just because, if you can meet the standard, why is your project not acceptable? And it is for everybody else, but this person, it can't be acceptable before because one person doesn't like it.
And that's where the judgment comes in to the decision maker. An example, well, I don't want to get into a specific project because it may actually come before you. But if someone does complain, you know, this is too noisy, then you guys can say, well, yes, you're going to hear it. They already reduced it below the standard, or they reduce it to the standard, and given the surrounding noise factor, that's good enough. And we're sorry that you don't want to hear this, but it meets our standard and it's not a significant increase, or they've already reduced it to a point where, you know, as best they can. That's where your judgment comes in as a decision-making body on a project. But they could, you know, you could also find that, yeah, you meet our standard, but it's so quiet out here right now, that's going to adversely impact all the people around this use, and we want you to bring it down further. And this gives you the authority to do that as a decision-making body. But allows some flexibility and judgment on the part of the decision makers.
You guys okay with that?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about it. I mean, it's a troublesome point.
It is a very
I think Lisa's
troublesome-
concern is not so much that it gives flexibility to person in your position, but that it gives attack points against a project that might, that
I guess-
otherwise would look at it and say, you know,
The
we're...
attack points are already there. We have to address it under CEQA.
But it takes away the standard. So we're sitting here and we're voting on setting standards, and then we contradict ourselves and get very ambiguous in our language by saying, this is our standard, but we can restrict you anyway. I can understand where there would be occasions where we need some language like that, where there could be some really unusual circumstances if somebody wants to do something. But I don't understand why we're setting a standard and we're not going to live by that standard, because we're not going to apply the rule to all and we're going to handpick who it can't qualify to. I mean, it's real simple. If it's standard, here it is, this is what we follow. But then when we start saying we can be more restrictive, anybody can go out there and pull that one sentence out, and now we're going to be sitting under, a mess.
I think that you have to look at someone can try that.
Yeah, they will,
And
guaranteed.
I think the flip side of that is someone could say, I meet the standards, so you can't impose any further mitigation measure on my project.
Well, I think the CEQA would say otherwise, so I don't believe that statement's true, because we would have to follow the CEQA guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
So they still have to have restrictions imposed.
And this is just recognizing that fact. That's really all that sentence does. It recognizes
Well,
the
I
fact
don't
that
like
we
the way
can
it's
still
worded then.
impose
Let me-
noise restrictions greater than what are in here.
Let me see if I can pinpoint where the...
I would, can I?
Well, go ahead, sure.
Okay, so if that was going to be the case, and you're saying that based on a CEQA report, then maybe we need to be specifically stating it to that versus just giving that language is so ambiguous, it just, in my mind, blows up into a mess. So maybe we need to be referencing what would trigger more restrictive. What could make the county make a decision to be more restrictive, and what report would provide that data for us to do that?
It is the low ambient noise levels.
That's the trigger.
That's the
There is a
trigger.
trigger there.
Well, it's...
Perhaps it needs to be
It's
clarified.
the phrase low ambient noise levels might be the problem, because low, what's low, lower, what's low here? Is it possible to adjust that phrase so that it's more clear under what conditions the county looks to be more restrictive? Not just low, but how low? Lower than what?
Average.
Lower than what?
Average. And
Lower
then you're
than
going to ask me
average?
what is average.
Well,
Well, we have a standard.
but then we can look at some numbers, can we not? I mean,
I don't think you can do numbers, because it's going to be based on a report that someone's going to go out and pay for. That report would say, this is not good for this neighborhood, and it's going to be horrible for those residences or whatever's in that area.
So for an example, let's say that the ambient noise level versus the new noise level that's going to come in with the new project is going to increase it by 10 decibels. Does that sound reasonable or not reasonable if the difference is 10 decibels?
So I have some language that may or may not address it.
Okay.
We may want to be more specific. I would, instead of, so we would read, the county can impose noise level standards that are more restrictive than those specified in this table.
yeah, not the following, but
Yes. Where existing low ambient noise levels are substantially lower than the threshold established in the table.
okay. Freeze that for a second. Now, give me the threshold established in this document.
60, 65, these numbers. And so primarily, we're talking about outdoor activity areas, because that's, so it's going to be 60 or 65.
Right,
So
it's the last half of that sentence that makes the biggest difference. Can you repeat it again?
where existing low ambient noise levels are substantially lower than the thresholds established in this table.
You don't need the first low, because whatever it is. Where the existing ambient noise levels are substantially lower than the thresholds established in tables 1 and 2?
Well, this is the footnote.
Table 1. Okay. Now, all we need is an example of substantially. Do we need to quantify that?
That's, I guess, the question. I would be reluctant to.
Would too, because it's going to look individually.
What's substantial?
Yeah, you know, we get into that, what's significant, what's substantial, you know. And
However, there are numbers that we can point to as to what's substantial, what's not. It's a 3 is this, a 5 is that, and a 10 is that.
It was the footnote of a 10BA change is subjectively heard as a tenfold response. So if you go to page 3, the page NOI 3, where we changed that footnote because it was tenfold instead of approximately doubling, to me that's substantial.
El Dorado County looks at it from the standpoint of how low they can adjust it as opposed to the other way around. They basically, their footnote says, the county can impose noise level standards which are up to 5 decibels less than those specified in the table upon a determination of existing low ambient noise levels in the vicinity of the project site. So they do quantify it.
They quantify the front end, not the back end.
Exactly.
Okay,
Well,
I say they quantify the back end, not the front end. They quantify how much lower you can go.
But I like their front end
I do
quantification
too.
because that says we can go lower, but not, you know, how low can you go?
Exactly.
Okay, so the front end quantification is valid, and I think we ought to plop that in here. And we take a step further and address the back end, which, using Peter's language, referencing see his threshold references,
Where existing ambient noise levels are substantially lower.
yes, we're existing, I'm sorry, I have to ask for a repeat of your phraseology again, Peter.
Where existing ambient noise levels are substantially lower than the thresholds established in this table. So the county can impose, I don't know why I can't say that, impose noise levels standards that are 5 decibels lower than those specified in this table.
Right, now the threshold issue is, now substantially is kind of
That's
the, you know, one of those jiggle words. And where you would go to determine what is substantial, would that not be the table on page 3? Not table, but guidelines. Does that help you?
I think that would help. I'm reluctant to establish a very firm line, you know, 9 decibels versus 10 decibels. I think either case it's going to be, you know, obnoxious. It's going to be noisy. It's going to be not loud.
Okay,
so I think that we can make that determination, but if you want to have a limit of how low we can go, adding that 5 decibel threshold is certainly, that's a perceptible difference, you know, a noticeable change.
Well, yeah, but at least it provides a trigger that's a point, that's a particular number. The trigger is, not the trigger, but the limit.
It provides predictability for the applicant.
Yeah, predictability, thank you.
Can you read that one more time, please?
The county can impose noise level standards which are up to 5 decibels less than those specified in the table upon a determination of, however you want to word it, existing substantially lower ambient noise levels in the vicinity of the project site.
I like that. I like that.
Ambient noise levels established by the threshold, and you have the rest of that
Substantial.
language. Combining hers with yours,
Okay.
you got that?
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
can we replace H with that?
Sure.
Strike H altogether on page NOI 9?
Well, it'd be the first sentence of H
Okay, perfect.
that we
And
want to see
then-
that. And then that same language would apply to
Table two?
table, or footnote A of table 2.
A, page NOI 10. I don't know if you guys are all okay with that or not.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Ted?
Are you done?
I'm done. Now I'm ready for your motion. I'm sorry.
Then if the motion is still good, the second is still good.
And the motion would include those 2 additional changes of changing the theater's auditorium indoor noise levels to 45 decibels and the modification to footnotes H of table 1 and A of table 2. as read into the record.
Correct.
Correct.
So we have
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. 4 yes, 1 absent.
2 down.
Okay. We have no study session.
There's been no study session, but we do have one more chance for the public to make a comment on anything that's not on today's agenda. Jump to the chance. I knew you'd make it.
I know it's not often that you hear compliments, so
Be sure to
Could you
sign
introduce
in.
yourself?
sign in. Pen doesn't work that well.
And for the benefit of the TV audience, be sure you give your name.
Dennis Mills, private citizen. But I just wanted to make a point that I've been watching these proceedings on television because I'm not always able to be here. And I would like to compliment the commissioners on your attention to detail and your willingness to engage completely in this whole process. It's just remarkable to watch the activity and the interplay that goes on between each of you as you work through it. So kudos. Good job.
Thank you. Hey. Any other public comment before we adjourn? Yes.
Al McElroy from Angels Camp. Again, I would like to take Dennis's compliments to you. And I believe this young lady here addressed my comments early on in trying to define all of these complicated units that weren't clearly defined in the original. I really, it added like 4 pages to this document. I'm sorry for that. But it was nicely done. I can now understand what all these numbers mean. One additional thing related to our tables 1 and 2. Under policies, you start using the terms standards set forth in tables 1 and 2, but you never use that word to describe the tables. So table 1, for example, noise exposure levels for sensitive. I would say if you want to use the word standard, rather than my suggestion guidelines, that you have to do it there. Noise exposure standards. That's table 1. Table 2, it's entitled maximum allowable noise. Nowhere does it say standards. So that's my last comment and a little detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? And do you have any thing on your table as far as our next meeting?
Next meeting, we're still ironing out the last edits on the background report. Hope to have that to you tomorrow. We'll also post it on the internet. It's a huge document. I can't email it to you unless you have like a Dropbox or some type of file sharing program. We can put it on disk, or I can print it out in hard copy. It's in the range of 250 pages, lots of maps and charts and things like that. There'll be a report along with it.
Isn't that something we're going to want to have in our...
You're going to want to have it in your hands. So tell you what, we'll print it out. I'll let you know when it's available. We can, figure out how the best way to get it to you. You can stop by and get it. Lisa, if you want.
So there's going to be a printout waiting at the desk for me when I come by and get one?
Sure. Yes. I will let you know when it's available, and contact us and we'll figure out the best way to get it to you.
I think the best is for us to pick them up so we don't have
Probably
that postage expense.
Yeah, that'd be best. Lisa, if you, unless you're coming here to San Andreas for some other reason, we can figure out a place in Murphy's or Arnold to drop it off or something like that.
The one that's on the one that's on the website now is the one that you worked from.
Yes, that was a draft that was released in December along with the general plan.
Okay.
It's a separate document. It's not actually a part of the general plan itself, but it's the background information that we used. And we're updating some of that information, providing some additional description that will be, I don't want to get into too much detail about it because it's really not on our agenda right now, but that's...
Would the one that you're going to give us be different from the one from December by virtue of underscored language so that we can see the difference?
Yes.
Okay, otherwise it's the December 14 draft with these additions or corrections or changes?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So you probably won't need both of them. Bring the current one that we'll distribute to you hopefully tomorrow.
And it'll be posted for people?
It'll be posted on the internet on our website for people to look at or download.
How many pages?
It's like 250 pages, something like that.
Yeah.
Voluminous.
And that'll be, I'm not holding you to this, but you think that'll be tomorrow?
I hope to get it done tonight or early tomorrow, so we will have it available, so that you have plenty of time to look at it.
And this is for next Thursday?
This would be for next Thursday.
And that's the only thing on our...
That's the only thing on the agenda.
Agenda?
Yes.
Okay. The
other option would be we wait. I think we have, well, no, we've got the return of the 035 determination on the asphalt plant on September 10th. 10th, is that the 10th, whatever the date that first Thursday is. Well, that was the... Barring unless we don't have the information, we've got one or two other items on. We could, if you want more time to review that document, we could trail that to, have that at the end of the meeting and then not meet next week. I'm just concerned it's taking me longer to go through all the comments and the edits and the changes. And next up will be land use, and that's going to be quite an effort. I hope to get that available to you by the 10th so that we can start discussions on the 17th.
I'm just having I can't imagine how much work the background report would be for us, how much discussion there would be. I don't have a feel for it.
I don't think it's not like something where there's policy language that tells directs the county to do something or directs an applicant to do something. It's a technical appendix. It's information that we used in developing the plan. There's a lot of information that's out there. So I don't think that your review is going to take a lot of time other than it's just a lot of documents. But a lot of it's stuff you've already seen. The maps themselves don't change. We'll identify where we've updated tables and figures or added new stuff that probably should have been in there. But it's simply, it is what it is. It's the facts. It's the background information. So I guess the biggest point of discussion is, should there be other information in there? It won't take a whole day to review. There won't be, we won't be wordsmithing, language, policy language or anything like that.
My feeling is that we ought to meet next Thursday and put this behind us and not stack it onto another meeting and not push it down the road a few weeks or a couple of weeks.
Okay.
That even if it's a short meeting that we get rid of it, we've accomplished something.
We'll do our best to get it out tomorrow then, so you have time to review it. Unless there's another feeling.
Anybody have a problem meeting just for that one thing?
Well, kind of. If we could put it to the back side of 035, it gives them more time to get it completed, printed, and out to us. I can see some stress on Annette's face. So, if you think it's going to be a rather short meeting, then could we put it to the...
Well, the other possibility is that we're still waiting for the final information, I believe, from the asphalt company to make that determination. We met with them last week. There's some information that we need from them in order to analyze based on the direction. It may not be ready to go on the 10th. It may be continued, in which case we have a very short meeting on the 10th.
I'd like to recommend that we wait to do, if we could get the documents as soon as possible to review them, I'd like to recommend that we put it to the next meeting, and we could save a lot of costs not meeting next week and give some, it's up to you guys.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
And if 035 isn't ready on the 10th, the background report is there anything else that we can tack into add to that meeting?
Well, we have two other items which we've advertised for that meeting. So we will have a meeting regardless on that date.
Okay.
So why don't we go ahead and do that? So we'll continue discussion of the general plan to the 10th of September. Someone verify that that's a Thursday?
So September 10th will either be 035 asphalt or background report and a couple of other items.
There'll be a couple of other items. It could be all three. The other items, 035 and this. Let's just see how the time goes.
And or.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
and the 10th is a Thursday.
And I have nothing else.
Okay, if that's all, then we are adjourned.
Thank you.